If you carry a firearm and discharge your weapon in self-defense, you could face hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees and expenses. So carry the protection of CCW Safe, Self-Defense Legal Services membership. Upfront payment of all criminal and civil defense costs with no out-of-pocket for members. Unlimited defense budgets, unmatched legal expertise. Carry the same level of support police officers have. Carry CCW Safe, the highest caliber.
Hello, we are back on a Tuesday and fighting communism and color revolution with every bone and sinew in our body. I am John Wheaton, here for Survival Dispatch. I am the co-founder of Righteous Savages, and I'm here with you tonight. And as always, is my intelligence expert and fellow anti-communist, Mr. S2. How are you this evening, sir?
Well, I don't know if I'm an expert, but I know things about things.
Yes. Well, we'll just say that. So we gotta pump our egos a little bit every once in a while, right? So tonight we are going to continue to cover the absolute insanity and connect a few dots for you on what's going on in Los Angeles and what looks to be going on more broadly by this weekend, because there is a specific date coming up that the leftists have targeted as a overthrow or a revolt, I guess you could say, revolution, for lack of a better term. But we're going to connect the dots with that and modern day color revolutions and how this ties to really communistic ideology. And so it's kind of fitting. We just kind of wrapped up our long series on the history of communism. And here we are faced with more communism in the modern day. So without further ado, we'll get into it. S2, anything that you would like to throw out at the beginning to kind of set the stage for tonight?
Okay, so first we need to understand what a color revolution is. Color revolutions refer to a series of nonviolent pro-democracy uprisings in a post-Soviet world and other authoritarian states. Primarily, they occurred in the early 2000s, and they were characterized by mass protests and symbolic use of colors or pictures. And what they aimed to do was to overthrow entrenched regimes, often accused of corruption or electoral fraud, and promote democratic reforms. So that's really what a color revolution is in a nutshell. It's basically the supposed grassroots uprising and revolution of the people to overthrow their government.
Yes. But it's also an organized, in a lot of cases, it's not necessarily a rise up of the everyday people. It is backed by something other than the people on the ground. Would you characterize that as correct?
In a certain sense, I think what ends up happening is over a period of time, like things that we've witnessed over the last 5 years, there's a substantial portion of populations that are gaslighted, and they are basically brainwashed to believe whatever propaganda is being thrown out there, so that they will participate, or i.e. be recruited into these color revolutions unwittingly or wittingly, as it would be.
Yeah, and we have seen versions, not necessarily color revolutions, but if you go back to even stuff like Occupy Wall Street, the George Floyd riots, the current LA ICE riots, they carry some of the same characteristics, and they push the same kind of ideology, even though in the back of all of these things that I just mentioned is a leftist ideal, or maybe even some sort of government agency that is connected to that. But let's start at the beginning tonight, and that is, we're going to start at the beginning. We're going to work our way backwards. So we're going to give you the situation on the ground currently per the current news. So let's go to that. DHS released a statement on violence. This is straight from the DHS website. DHS released a statement on violent rioters assaulting ICE officers in Los Angeles, California, and calls on Democrat politicians to tone down dangerous rhetoric about ICE. This talks about 1,000 rioters surrounded the federal law enforcement building and assaulted ICE law enforcement officers, slashing tires, defacing buildings, and taxpayer-funded property. And you can see here there's some
government owned.
It's basically an assault on government-owned property, which last I checked there's a term for that, insurrection.
It's called a felony.
Yeah. So our ICE enforcement officers are facing 413% increase in assaults against them. Disturbingly, in recent days, ICE officers' family members have been doxxed and targeted as well. And this is a tweet from Karen Bass, the mayor of Los Angeles, saying that we do not stand for this. We've also seen prominent Democrats come out in support of these riots. Hakeem Jeffries, Mayor Wu of Boston, Tim Walz, no surprise there, Mayor Bass of Los Angeles, where this is going on.
Mudfish Waters.
Yes. And we'll I actually have something that I'll show you guys here in just a minute of Maxine Waters, and it is a very shall we say telling thing. But currently we're looking at just an all-out assault on law and order, because this is essentially what is being carried out as law and order. These people are here illegally. They broke the law to be here. Unfortunately, even if they are not violent, they already have broken the law. Now, the one caveat to that, as I will say, is they are starting with the ones that are connected to violence and connected to crime. So they are starting by trying to get them out first, and then we'll deal with the rest as it goes. S2?
So what's important when we start breaking down what color revolutions look like is we need to start looking at the pattern recognition there.
Mm-hmm.
And what every single one of these events that you have mentioned had in common with each other was they had a triggering event. Okay, so the triggering event for what's going on in LA right now was the raids that were being conducted in Los Angeles for these illegal criminals that were part of this criminal cartel organization. What we saw in 2020 with George Floyd was the perception of police brutality and murder of George Floyd, which later on we found out was actually a heart attack and a drug overdose.
Mm-hmm.
So once again, that goes back to my example of gaslighting. And the same thing that's happened then is happening now. The public is not getting the full facts of everything. And the fact that 20 million or more of these illegals came into this country, they were almost all fighting age men that came into this country, which would indicate that they were, and in fact, in observing some of the videos and photos, you can look at the way some of the mannerisms of these people are, and the way, just even in the way they stand, you can tell they are prior military.
Yep. The aforementioned Maxine Waters. Let's watch this real quick. It's a 47-second clip. This is essentially the same as these are mostly peaceful protests while a strip mall is ablaze behind them. So let's watch this real quick.
And even those who were out of step with what we are advocating, peaceful protest, did not create any violence. Nobody was shot, nobody was killed. Get it in your head. And so when martial law is called, what are you going to say? I missed the point. Don't miss the point, you all. Don't think that somehow, because they called out the National Guard, there was violence. There was no violence. I was on the street. I know. And I went from downtown detention back out into the community, talking to people, what happened in Paramount, what happened in Compton, what happened in Inglewood. So, first of all, get it straight. And don't just rely on what you're being told or the few incidents that you saw. And even those.
A video is worth a million words. Not violent. I don't know I saw anything that wasn't violence in that clip.
So it's also important to understand too that where she was, you have numerous groups out there that are
Mhm.
not necessarily working to each other, but when you have these protests out there, you do have a nonviolent progressive group
Correct.
out there that was protesting, but you can't control who shows up to these protests. Okay, so we know for a fact Antifa is there. Anytime that you see these kind of direct actions taking place with the black bloc going on, now these guys that we see on the screen right now with the white t-shirts and the black and all of that, those guys are probably not Antifa, but they are probably some of the Mexican nationalists that came into this country, i.e., the former military folks. Um, but the point that I'm making is that probably where she was, she can truthfully say that because she was probably in the area where the progressive nonviolent folks were actually peacefully protesting.
Right. Because there's layers to this. As we saw in
But
2020,
yeah,
we
but
saw in Occupy Wall.
she damn well knows there was fucking pardon my, damn well knows there was violence.
Yes. Yes. It is this is the ultimate form of gaslighting, because you can literally scroll on X and find, 500 videos. One of the things that I thought was hilarious was that somebody posted a video amongst a bunch of other videos, and it just happened to be of 2020. Gavin Newsom actually retweeted and said, "This video is from 2020. Quit pushing lies." And immediately his responses, his comments on that retweet was people posting videos of cars on fire and places on fire and smashed up. And it's like, well, okay, when is this from? And it was literally from that day. So he basically just like burned himself. I think he actually deleted the tweet, but it's really funny how they want you to continue to piss on your boot and tell you that it's raining, and gaslight us to say, oh, well, this is obvious. This is also a communistic play, is to tell you that, this is not violence. This is not this. This is normal. This is normal to revolution. And that's what they want people to believe. They actually want people to believe that this is a normal thing and that we shouldn't be worried about it, to control the narrative so that they can allow this to continue to bully. Think about Los Angeles for a second. What has it been through this year? Well, we had the fires in February, I believe, that burned down large portions of the the residential centers in Los Angeles area. And now we have this. I mean, how much more can this city take before people actually say, okay, this is enough, we're getting the heck out of here, or something along those lines? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's another thing too that you have to understand, where when these events occur, they tend to take place in a particular area of demographic of it's not completely LA. It's like right in the center. So if you look at right in the center of there, the particular demographic is what Mayor Bass is always talking about. You were talking about Compton and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, she wasn't even there when the fires were going on. She was in Ghana. And why she was in Ghana?
Yep.
Why she was in Ghana? She was lobbying Ghana to bring a Ghana embassy to LA. And then we can go back and we can also start tying her back to Castro and whatever brigade she was a member of at that point in time. She made 7 trips over to Cuba during a time when it was illegal for Americans to go to Cuba.
Mm-hmm.
And there are also communist ties in Ghana as well. So she's in cahoots with her little communist buddies again.
Yep. And it starts to make you realize that so many of these people are planted by the powers that be, the people that are pulling the strings behind the scenes that aren't in the public eye. And make no mistake, those people exist. And the most powerful people in this country you never will see on camera. But they put these people in place to seize power And it's ironic because you guys remember the of Chicago that was ousted because everybody was fed up with her, and then they just replace her with somebody who's in a lot of ways worse. And that's what continues to happen because the powers that be don't allow actual change agents to be installed. They want to keep control, and so they continue to feed lies to the people and make them say the right thing. But it's just same book, different chapter when it comes to this.
And it's why they have to get Trump out, because
Correct.
he can't be controlled, and he is that change agent.
Yes. Yep. And yeah, that's the reality of it. Watch this from CBS News, just kind of a report on what's going on, and then we'll get into some other items as well.
Marines to LA and another 2,000 National Guards troops to LA in order to protect federal buildings and employees amid the ongoing protests against ICE operations. Now, that brings the total number of National Guards troops to 4,000 in the county. The Pentagon says deploying the support to Los Angeles will cost $134 million. And as the additional military support arrives, President Trump told members of the press he isn't ruling out the use of the 1807 Insurrection Act in Los Angeles.
Take a look at what's happening. I mean, I could tell you there were certain areas of Los Angeles that you could have called it an insurrection. It was terrible. But these are paid insurrectionists. These are paid troublemakers. They get money.
Los Angeles.
S2 comments on his last comment.
In my view, what Newsom has said and what Bass has said and what they are both doing, I am amazed that either one of them are not in cuffs already.
Yes,
totally
because
amazed. But the problem that Trump has is he has optics to worry about.
Yes.
Because if he does go heavy-handed with this, which, by the way, is the only way that this is going to get resolved for good, he's basically going to play into their hands and say, see, he's a fascist. We told you he's a fascist. He's just like Hitler. So he has to walk this very, very fine line, which he's doing. And by the way, the lawsuit that Newsom brought against the administration about deploying the National Guard and everything, that's been dismissed, but nobody's talking about that.
No, and they wouldn't. Notice you have all of these people recording everything so that they can push whatever narratives. Mexican flags being flown.
But it's okay, California, because the Marines are mostly peaceful. Just telling you.
Fire set. Looks like military's trying to, or police is trying to put that out. It's, I mean, you look at this and I don't think anything else than really, honestly, like a war zone. That's what it looks like.
Well, what's happening here is, so color revolutions typically are taking plays from the playbook of Gene Sharp. Gene Sharp was an American political scientist, and he was also the founder of the Albert Einstein Institute. And he was actually one who provided a strategic framework of 198 methods for nonviolent resistance. And what they've done here is they have escalated this to the point where it's not even recognizable of Gene Sharp's work anymore. It used to be where they were just pushing the boundaries enough that they weren't actually committing felonies, but now they've gotten to the point where they're committing felonies, and every single one of these people that's committing these acts should be arrested, jailed, and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law.
Yep.
It's the only thing communists understand.
Correct. It's like dealing with a bully. Bullies only understand power, and a lot of times when you enact that power and you push it on them, they actually back down quite quickly, because the reality is they aren't necessarily willing to go the full bore because, well, they're just not ready for that kind of power to meet them.
And I'll take this a step further. They only understand fear and pain.
Correct.
Unless you inflict pain on them, they are not going to stop until they are stopped. Period.
Yep. So, and here we go. Worrying footage is anti-ICE protesters doling out tactical gear in Los Angeles as violence escalates. Now, here's what the left will do with this kind of a thing. They'll use this as like, this is why people shouldn't be able to buy tactical gear or body armor and all this stuff. The reality is most of this is probably like the cheap Amazon crap that costs $20. It's not real.
No, they were actually handing out the real deal there. I've got some other information on that too.
Well, then that means they're funded, because I don't know if you guys realize how much real body armor costs, how much real tactical helmets cost. It's like $1,500. Not even joking.
They're probably giving them bump helmets, which,
that's still a real name brand one's still $400 or $500 for a bump helmet.
Yeah, so. the UVEX masks they were handing out were actually the real deal. And now I will tell you that anytime that you see that happening, the people that are getting that equipment, that is Antifa. That's what you have to understand.
Those are the financed people.
Well, they're all financed. They're all financed. But these guys are the direct action group. That's what they are.
Yep. So, yeah, so let's dive into that a little bit more. So the direct action are going to be the people that are going to actually do violence, as we said earlier. But both elements are paid. But one is really to show the peaceful side, so that they can push that narrative harder than they can the ones that are doing direct action, the ones that are actually engaging the police and engaging the National Guard and doing all of this kind of stuff and setting fires and wreaking havoc and terror on people. In that first video that I showed, that one thug that was throwing stuff at every passing car, any one of those could have resulted in a death. To say that there was no violence, any one of those could have resulted into a death. If that smashes into the window, causes the driver to be impaired, all of a sudden you have a car careening out of control that could kill tens or even dozens of people with some kind of car accident. So the intent is to strike terror into everybody, to actually get people to acquiesce versus this kind of bullying that they're pushing out. So,
well, here's another little interesting tidbit. So it's a well-known fact by now that USAID has been funding these color revolutions around the world. But something that a lot of people don't, they've probably heard this acronym, NED. NED is the National Endowment for Democracy. Guess who served on the National Endowment for Democracy as vice chair? Take a wild guess. Karen Bass.
Oh, how the circle always ends up being completed. So, yeah.
So this is where some of the funding is likely coming from. Now, they've also traced it back to a gentleman who is an American who now lives in China. His name is Neville Roy Singham. Him and another co-founder of Code Pink have been there are primary source documents available showing that a lot of this funding is actually coming from China, coming from Neville Roy Singham and the Code Pink co-founder. I can't remember her name right off, but there are some primary source documents out there showing that that's where this funding is coming from. But there's also some hazy lines out there showing that the CCP is also involved in this.
Yeah. So it's very, very insane, but this is what is wanted, because it's about destabilization. It's about destroying the fabric of the country and pitting people against each other. And you can already see this throughout how this goes when it comes to being online. People are taking stances without knowing anything or understanding historical context. I've had some people that I know that have posted things about, oh, we've got to be caring and loving. I'm like, you do not understand where we're at. We are not at caring and loving. We're at the Visigoths are coming over the wall, and you're
punch you in the face.
Yeah. They're wanting to take you out and destroy your way of life, and you're positing, oh, we've got to take care of people, and we've got to be understanding and committed to being nice. And it's like, no, this is not a nice moment. This is the moment where you really have to understand the history of this, as we've laid out over the last 8 or 9 episodes on communism. If you do not understand the history, then you won't understand what you're up against, and that's honestly the reality. So
another thing that color revolutions almost all have in common with each other is there's usually some sort of electoral fraud that kind of sets this off. So they do this because they need to basically demonstrate illegitimacy of the current administration that's in power. So in this case, it was Trump, and in the prior to Biden, it was Trump again. So what did they try to do in both cases? They tried to delegitimize his authority, and that's what they're trying to do again.
Right. Exactly. So let's draw some parallels here. You guys remember 2020? I mean, who could forget that? It was a year that really very few people will forget throughout their lives that lived through it, that at an adult age. And this was set off the Summer of Love. You guys were probably aware of that term. And this was the term used for the George Floyd protests. This is obviously Wikipedia, but riots is what they were. The George Floyd riots cost north of $2 billion, almost $3 billion in damages to private owned businesses. There were multiple assaults on federal buildings, but the main targets of these violent riots were the private owned businesses, and the looting and the smashing of buildings in New York City, from all the way from New York City to Los Angeles to Wisconsin small towns, where were made famous by a young man who was protecting buildings and shot 3 protesters. Ironically, all 3 of them were
Pedophiles.
It's really weird how that always seems to happen. But this was one of the more recent attempts at some sort of color revolution. Now, this was not a necessarily like an orange revolution or the tulip revolution or any of those that we'll talk about here in a minute, but it was specifically a race revolution. The Black Lives Matter organization was the one that pushed this narrative across to the entire country. And across the country, there were multiple riots, as I said, costing billions of dollars to insurance companies and privately owned property, because capitalism is evil. Remember that. So in your mind, as to what parallels can we draw from the George Floyd riots, and then we're going to talk about even Occupy Wall Street had some tinges of these color revolutions of what we're going to see when we get into those, the history of these.
Well, obviously, first you had the triggering event.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that you had too was that you had the recruitment of what appeared to be grassroots people rising up in solidarity, if you will. That is a communist term. So anytime that you hear somebody say solidarity, you can just about bet that they're speaking communist talk. And then you had the symbolism. You had the Black Lives Matter with the raised fist. I believe that's been used before in other actions back, I want to say probably in the Soviet Union. And then you had Antifa, who of course came about in Germany, where they had the black flag, and that's exactly what they used. So you had that symbolism that was out there, and it was in your face all the time. So those are those are three characteristics of a color revolution anytime you see that. Hence the reason why we had things like you called the tulip revolution, you had the orange revolution, you had the rose revolution. That was their symbolism and their colors that they used.
Yep. So here you go. Antifa, there's the flag. Notice that it's black and red. What color is red specifically tied to pretty heavily?
Communism.
Yeah.
Well, and interestingly enough, they found an upside down triangle painted somewhere in LA, and that is actually a symbol that Hamas uses. And it was also, oddly enough, a symbol that was used in pre-World War II Hitler days when they were used to identify the Jews based on what color triangle that they had on their clothing.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And so with that symbolism, and then we look at the 2011, it was September, it was about 2 months long, relatively non-violent, but it was leftist populist movements of Occupy Wall Street. And this was, if any of you guys that can remember this, it was when they set up all of these tents and this tent city in downtown New York off of Wall Street to try and bully the bankers and all of this kind of stuff. And this was once again an anti-capitalist movement of young people trying to overthrow and trying to push these things. Now, this was in response to something that I didn't agree with at the time. In 2008, George W. Bush pushed the bank bailouts after the housing crisis. And I did not agree with that move. And as a conservative, as a Republican, well, I'm not a Republican, but as a conservative-minded person and a liberty thought, a pro-liberty person, I'm going to say, yeah, I didn't agree with that because this was basically saying that it was too big to fail. And as a result of that, instead of dealing with a recession, maybe even a minor depression at the time, we just continued to let these banks think that they could do whatever they want. So I didn't agree with that. What I also did not agree with was the ideology of Occupy Wall Street, because it was dipped in communistic ideas from the left wing, and it was to fight against economic inequality, capitalism, corporate greed, big finance, the influence of money in politics. Now, notice how they always tie a lot of these things together. Capitalism is always this thing, and this is where they try and intertwine capitalism as not private property ownership, but they want to tie it to corporate greed, which nobody really agrees with corporate greed. And nobody
actually, what they tie it to is the exploitation of the proletariat.
Well, right, exactly. So there's a communist talking point right there. So we have seen these going through all of the iterations over the last. So that was 2011. So that was almost 15 years ago. It was 14 years ago.
And oddly enough, at that time there were two other things going on in the world too. So they tried this before.
Yep.
There was the Jasmine Revolution in Tunisia between 2010 and 2011, which marked the beginning of this Arab Spring. And then you had Egypt, which was the Lotus Revolution.
Yes. So many of these things that are happening in the same time, that it becomes clear to a certain extent that you can start to pinpoint these events and see them. So here's the Lotus Revolution that S2 just talked about. So 2011, same exact period of time. Now, the Occupy Wall Street was at the end of 2011. This started at the beginning. So this was the Egyptian Revolution. And so as you can see, when you look throughout history, even like with communism, full-on communism, you see that the roots of communism grew out of China and Russia at the same time. They took root at different times, but they grew really out of the same thing. And for China, it was the growth out of the the revolution in 1949, post World War II, when Mao finally was able to jettison Chiang Kai-shek to Taiwan, and he took over. And then later on, it was the Cultural Revolution of the 1970s or 1960s and 1970s that led to the full-on communist push into China and so many millions of people dead. Whereas Russia, it started in the early 1900s, 1917, 1918, and then it was in the 1940s to the 1960s that that really took root and a lot of people died. So these revolutions are always followed by some sort of violence once they gain power. The key is to not let them gain power. So
don't take their bait either, because
correct.
that's what they want. They want something like, and I'll use the LA situation as an example. What they are trying to do right now, why Antifa is out there, is they are trying to bait law enforcement and military into a scenario where they go hands-on, or somebody fires a gun into a crowd. It'll probably be will be a false flag that will occur, where somebody will be standing on top of a rooftop and they will fire indiscriminately into this crowd of the nonviolent progressive protesters, and that will be a trigger event. That is what they are looking for. So if anybody happens to be near these things, do not take their bait. In fact, the best thing to do is just don't even be near it.
Yes, and that's absolutely correct. So now we get into the historical context of color revolutions, and really color revolutions are more of a recent thing, and it's a symbolism. They use a symbol of a color or something along those. We just talked about Antifa. Their symbol is black with the black flag with red built into it. So really, you see a lot of these. So we go back to 1989. This is just a short blurb in Britannica. This was. Oh, what did I do? I just.
I was going to say, don't use Wikipedia as your source for this.
Yes.
It's run by the CIA.
Yes, understood. But this is really just to give an overview, so you guys can see the just the timeline. So 1989, the Velvet Revolution of Czechoslovakia. This was actually an overthrow of a communist rule in the country that had lasted for 40 years. So this was really kind of the first where a symbolic revolution had overthrown something that had been around for a while. So do you have any information on this, or would you like to move on?
So the Velvet Revolution was actually Armenia, not Czechoslovakia. And it was a mass protest against Serge, I can't pronounce the guy's last name. It was his attempt to extend his rule through a new role as prime minister that led to his resignation. It was led by Nikol Pashinyan, and that particular movement emphasized nonviolence and democratic reform, symbolized by the term velvet. It did result in Pashinyan's election and significant political changes, but the problem is that the corruption that was there persisted. So that's another symptom of what happens after color revolutions occur, is that most, if not all, of these regions, countries, states, whatever, they all go through this instability period, and they almost always go through economic downturn.
Yep. So, and then we have, and my apologies for, and this is just really just to give you guys a timeline. So in 2000, it was the overthrow of the Slobodan Milosevic. Milosevic. Sorry, I can't speak Russian very well. So this was Yugoslavia, and an overthrow of another government authoritarian. So speaking to this, and the reason I have S2 is because he has so much more information in his brain than I do in my research methods. So speaking of this, so this was in 2000. So we're starting to get into the last 25 years of the overthrow in Serbia.
And once again, this had to do with rigged elections, and the symbolism that they used were black and white symbols.
Yep. So, and this was a few years before the Georgia Rose Revolution in 2003. Oh, my link is gone. So this was, once again, the Rose Revolution was, as S2 just spoke, it was a response to election
Fraud.
or thought election fraud, whether it was real or not. But that was a movement of nonviolent protesters over fraudulent elections triggered by presidents exit and early polls. So they looked at the beginning polls and the end polls and said, "Hey, these don't match up with what we're looking at." And it was there was a revolution as a result of that. And this is in Georgia, not Georgia in the United States, but Georgia in close to it's close to Russia in the southern peninsula by the Black Sea. So
wasn't no, that was Romania. I'm sorry. I was thinking, wasn't there just an election in Georgia or something where they had jailed the political opponent? I can't remember.
I think that's in Romania. So and then there was the Ukraine Orange Revolution. And this was in Ukraine in 2004. And then there was another revolution, it looks like, in 2014 as well. Ukraine,
that was the Maidan Revolution.
Yep. So we have multiple of these color revolutions, and typically they are, as S2 talked about earlier, as a result of some sort of parliamentarian fraud, election meddling, perceived election cheating, and so that is that is where we're looking at, as close as recent as 2018, which was the Velvet Revolution. If I can find, or not Velvet, sorry, I misspoke there. The Velvet Revolution. Sorry, I was correct. So let me find I've got way too many tabs open. I apologize, guys. Here, and this was Armenians' Velvet Revolution in 2018, and once again, this was a result led by Nikol Pashinyan to topple Prime Minister Serge Saganya. I can't pronounce the names, so I apologize for that in my notes. So I don't know if you can pronounce those names better than I can. As you're
Pashinyan, Nikol Pashinyan.
Yeah,
he was the one that I mentioned a few minutes ago.
Yeah, so here's what we're, so this is not something new. Over the last 25 years, really all the way back to 1989, these have been a tactic that have been deployed, whether they were real or not, like really a grassroots thing, or in some cases, a lot of people believe that there may be some meddling. Remember, what have many people from the CIA said? And I should have seen if I could get Jeff MD on tonight. But what have a lot of people, ex-CIA people, said? What was the CIA really good at? Meddling in foreign elections,
overthrowing governments. And we actually had the State Department actually come out. I forget who the lady's name is right offhand, but I know that Norm Eisen was also involved in architecting the overthrow of Ukraine in 2014. They actually came right out and said that's exactly what they did.
Yep.
And they've been doing it for a very, very long time. And it started with Operation Gladio.
Yeah. Speak of Operation Gladio real quick.
Wow, I can't really speak of it quickly because it's a really deep and dark rabbit hole to go down. But essentially, it's an operation for the CIA to use resources and slush funds and dark money to overthrow governments around the world so that they can affect the kind of change that they want to change, whether it's economical, whether it's economics, political, social, whatever they want to do. Like I said, it's a really, really deep, dark subject that you could go down for ages if you wanted to.
For sure. And so we don't, here's the thing. There are two types of revolutions. And really in the last several hundred years, I would say there's probably been only maybe one for sure where a revolution actually turned things for the better overall. And that was the American Revolution. And there's a specific reason for this. It was not
Spain,
based
and the Spanish
and
Revolution
Spain with Franco, correct? So yeah. So and there's actually a good example. Franco is actually a good example of a quasi dictator that actually turned things around for his country. And I will tell you this. This is posited by Jesse Kelly a lot. If they end up being able to topple Donald Trump and they end up being able to gain control back, we will get a worse version. We will get a more focused version. And you can look at Franco and the revolution in Spain that actually shows what somebody who actually is I wouldn't say authoritarian, but actually is very focused in basically weeding out all of the bad in their country by any means necessary. And that would be a good example of that in modern history was when Spain brought Franco into power. And
but make no mistake, he was a dictator.
Yes,
He was
very much.
He was not a good guy.
Nope. But that's where you get when you continue to deliberately subvert people and gaslight them and all that stuff. And I'm not saying I am for that at all. What I am saying is if the powers that be, if the people pulling the strings behind the scenes, if that bullet had gone through Donald Trump's head in July of last year, almost a year ago, it would have taken some time, but the dust that would have, or the cloud that would have came out of that chaos would have been somebody even more, somebody that is actually more of a dictator than they are just a person that's going to handle the bully tactics of the left like Trump. Because I don't think Trump is a dictator at all in any sense of the word. But
I think what you would have seen is this country come unglued.
Correct. You would have seen a definite shift in that where people would have not been well, we would have had a civil war.
This country would have become Belfast.
Yes, that's a great that's a great analogy and example of where we were headed, and just a fraction of an inch away from that, guys. So thank God above that he turned Donald Trump's head, because even Trump says that he believes God saved him, and I believe that too, because we would not be in the same place that we are now if that would have happened. So in drawing a conclusion on a lot of this, I want to close out by talking about how we draw those parallels and how we see the language of the left and how it parallels that of communists, and so that we can be prepared. And then also I want to look forward to the date that's coming up later on this week, I believe on Saturday, which is June 14th. June 14th is Donald Trump's birthday, and there are a lot of rumblings about a massive nationwide protest on June 14th.
It's also the 250th anniversary of the Army.
So I'm going to give you a chance to talk a little bit of that. I'm going to pull up a couple of things on June 14th so that you guys can so we can look at that. But real quick on that, the language that we need to look at and how we need to approach this going forward.
So you need to understand who the June 14th organizers are. The organizers are the teachers unions and the teachers federations. They are the ones organizing this. These are the progressive nonviolence that are going on. But as I said before, they can't control who goes to these protests. So if Antifa happens to show up, and they will, and they're out there to bait violent action, that is what their job is. They will go there, and and don't make no mistake, the progressive nonviolence and Antifa, they don't play well together a lot of times. It's not to say that they won't work together for a common cause, but they don't like each other particularly because number one, Antifa are the radicals. Okay, the nonviolent progressives aren't radical enough for them. They don't agree. They don't agree on a lot of things. But another thing we need to understand about June 14th is that they're not just talking about June 14th. They are planning on protesting the entire week next week, not just June 14th. It's not going to be a one and done. Things are going to get bumpy.
Yep. So I've got a couple things here that I'm going to share. Let me get them up here. Well,
guess you're not. And you can find all of this information. It's all out there. You know, everybody keeps saying that, isn't it amazing how fast these protests just sprung up? No, they did not just spring up. They've been planning this for months. If you've been paying attention, they've been telling you that they're doing this.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are just saying, well, don't these people have jobs? And people don't understand. This is their job. They are getting paid, a lot of them, to do this.
The amount of money going into countering the Trump agenda would blow your mind.
So US Vet 314 posted in here, the protesters' website for the protest is nokings.org.
Yep.
I would say this much too, is that not just nokings.org. If you want to go down to the 5051 project, they list all of the protest events that are going on for all of these groups out there, and that is mobilize.us.
There you go. What is really funny about all this is that Trump's behavior has not been that of a king. It's been that of a law and order president that ironically is trying to give a lot more power back to the states and the people. Like, he's not acting like a king that's trying to grab power. He's actually acting quite in the opposite direction. But in any case, let's watch this real quick from Jesse Kelly, 2 minutes, 33 seconds. Jesse Kelly is one of my favorites, and he is a avowed anti-communist. So we'll watch this real quick about who's funding the LA riots.
This is not only paid for, it is oftentimes paid for with your money. You know, the main front group here, I want to give all the credit in the world to Jennifer Van Laar. She's an editor with Red State. She does great journalism. Anyway, credit to her for these nuggets. You ever heard of the group CHIRLA? CHIRLA. It's something, the Coalition for the Immigrant Rights or some crap like that. Doesn't matter. Who cares? It's a communist group. They actually work with other open communist groups. They're the ones leading these riots. Did you know that 96% of CHIRLA's funding came from the taxpayer? As you watch communists burn down America's cities, as you watch all the communist activism that goes on, you paid for it. Either the taxpayer pays it because the government swindled it and then handed it out as grants, or the taxpayer pays it because corporations fund this stuff. How many times have we talked about putting money where your morals are? If you're angry about that local pride parade with the super freaks in leather chaps dancing in front of your children, go look at the corporate sponsorship board and ask yourself how many of those products you've purchased yourself. paid for and paid for by you. They are professional groups with millions and millions of dollars of your money in their coffers. They get training for this stuff, and they go out and agitate. They find other agitators. And then, yes, eventually other people do get caught up in this. Maybe you're sitting around. Maybe you're young, angry, criminal, drugged out, drunk. Maybe you are just bored and you find out the rioters are up the streets and they're throwing Molotovs at cop cars. And you think to yourself, that sounds like a fun Thursday evening. Grab the marshmallows, Bill. And then it grows and grows and grows. But in the end, what you're seeing is never organic. When you see large-scale communist activism in the streets, always know it is paid for.
Absolute truth there.
National
Absolute.
Endowment for Democracy, USAID, Open Societies.
Well, and there's even, he talked about corporate level stuff. Here you go. So this is an article here. Christy Walton, you just said it. Christy Walton, who is the heiress to the Walmart Corporation. $17 billion in assets she has. She's acquired a mega fortune after being a widow of John Walton, who was actually Sam Walton's son, I believe. So she didn't even actually earn the money. She wasn't even a part of the family. She was married into it. And she is doing a massive level of funding of this.
Well, she's funding ads for it. She's not necessarily donating money to these organizations, as far as I know.
So here is the full page ad in the New York Times.
Yeah, she's been taking out the ads, but I don't think she's been giving money exactly to the organizations. At least there's no primary source documentation around that.
So
that's
here
another thing. That's another thing we have to be careful of too. When you see this stuff out on social media, please go look for this primary source documentation, because there's a lot of people out there that spew this crap out there that don't really know what the hell they're talking about.
Yes, that's why actually, if you guys have noticed, I used to use a lot more Twitter posts. I actually use articles now, even though those aren't perfect either, but they're a little bit more scrutinized than the person you don't know their name on Twitter who may have paid for a blue hash mark. But anyways, but this is the map of planned events. So you can see just about every state has multiples. I know that there will be one in the town 10 miles west of me in Carbondale, because it's a university town and they have protests there all the time. So I would highly recommend that if you see one of these events in your town, don't necessarily don't venture out. Don't be involved in this, because you never know how far these things are going to be devolved into violence. If there is one in your town,
stay away from it.
Stay away from it. Obviously, take precautions. We talk about preparedness on this channel a lot. So how do we prepare for these things? This is going to be another wave of violence. And I would imagine that come Saturday, there may be even some special streams on Saturday, depending on what happens, because it could get really ugly really fast. But how do you guys prepare for this? So let's close out with how you guys prepare for this really quick. Obviously, make sure you have a few days of food and water available, just in case some supermarkets or something get raided. Obviously, if you have weapons, make sure they're clean. Make sure that you are prepared to defend your property. But with that said, I would not venture out going looking for trouble. That is not a smart move. If Kyle Rittenhouse had not had multiple camera angles, including drone footage from the government, by the way, if he had not had that young man would have been hung up to dry. But there was too much evidence of him defending himself. You don't want to take that chance. I would highly recommend that you guys do not venture out. Don't go into counter protests, any of that kind of stuff. Let these crazies be crazy, and protect you and yours, your family, your property, your loved ones, and your communities. But do not go looking for trouble, and make sure that you are ready to have to stay in your house maybe for a couple of days. And if things come close to you, know the signs for when you should bail out. Houses can be rebuilt, but your lives are worth more than that. So I'm hoping that that's not the case in most places, but I fear that it will devolve into that, and that's exactly what they want. They want people to come out and shoot
Engage.
and
They want people
engage.
they want people to engage.
Yep. So, just remember that the ideology of liberty, the ideology of this country, is stronger than any communistic idea. And while we are engaged in truly a soft civil war right now, I truly believe that, and a revolution trying to happen at the same time, we have to remember that we put our trust in God. We put our trust in the principles that this country was founded on, and that we understand that a last resort is violence. We will meet that. We will take that resort if there is no other option. But our option is to engage in giving information to other people that will listen, and into preparing for those moments. So, as to anything to add to that?
Yeah. Be aware. You can find out in advance where these are going to be using mobilize.us, or you can go to the nokings.org and you can look at that and see what cities are going to be in. I'm going to say at this point, basically what we're seeing is in some of these smaller areas, you're getting a lot of the, for lack of a better term, the boomers coming out to these things, and they're generally only numbers about 35 to 40 people that are showing up to these things. Number two is that when you find out where these are, if they are near you and you are out and about, make sure you have alternate routes to go around these things. Don't go through them, because that's how a lot of people get hung up in these things is, like we'll look at what they did in LA, where they went out and they started blocking the highways out there. We've seen numerous occasions where they do that, and then tempers will flare and people get out of their cars and they'll engage. We've seen that happen quite often over the last 5 years. But make sure that you have alternate routes around these things, and more than one route. Don't just take one, because you never know where these things are going to pop up.
Yep. That is correct. So yeah, just make sure that you have a plan. Talk with your family members that may be close to this. If they're not aware of what's going on, they need to be made aware. That's another thing. You may have family members in one of these big cities and be like, hey, why don't you come down to our place for the weekend? If you live in a more rural area where these aren't going to be happening, protect your family and try and get them to listen, because you don't want anybody caught up in this garbage.
And I'll close with this too. I've mentioned her quite often. If people are listening, Dr. Karlin Boroshenko is going to be live streaming all of their planning events this week on her YouTube channel. Go seek her out and listen to these planning events that are going on. That way you will know in advance exactly what they plan to do.
Yep. Let me show this real quick. This is her. If you're looking, Karlin Boroshenko, anti-communist cult leader. She's actually live just about every night. So you can catch her lives after you watch ours. Okay, guys.
She's live. She will have these. If you go into her YouTube channel, she has a little tab in there that says lives. If you go in there, she's recording those and leaving those in there. If you want to watch them live, she'll advertise when she's going to be doing those. But she's advertising these planning events for this particular organization every day this week. So, and she'll probably be doing it next week when they're doing more planning for the coming week.
Yep.
So I highly advise that everybody go out there and at least watch one of these live videos.
Yep. So we're going to close it out there. Just remember, stay vigilant, stay prepared, and stay safe. Trust in God. And if we prepare and we trust in God, then we've got everything covered. One of the last things I want to give a shout out to, and we're going to actually close with it, but Roger Moore posted something that is old, but it's so relevant still. And that is, If I Were the Devil. If I Were the Devil is an old radio broadcast from Paul Harvey, the legendary radio man. I remember when I was a young kid, we used to listen to Paul Harvey every day. We're going to close out with that video and let you guys just listen to this and draw parallels to what he says in this message and really what we're seeing today. So that's it for us tonight. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Head over to Substack. We're doing the live stream on Substack, but head over there, sign up for a free membership. And if you have it in your budget or you would like to support us more, sign up for a paid membership. You get a lot more of those goodies, but just the free membership will give you a lot of information that you wouldn't otherwise have, absolutely free to you guys. And we'll see you guys on the next stream. Until then, stay safe, be prepared, fight communism, and God bless America.
If I were the devil, if I were the prince of darkness, I'd want to engulf the whole world in darkness, and I'd have a third of its real estate and 4/5 of its population, but I wouldn't be happy until I had seized the ripest apple on the tree, thee. So I'd set about, however necessary, to take over the United States. I'd subvert the churches first. I'd begin with a campaign of whispers. With the wisdom of a serpent, I would whisper to you as I whispered to Eve, do as you please. To the young, I would whisper that the Bible is a myth. I would convince them that man created God instead of the other way around. I would confide that what's bad is good and what's good is square. And the old I would teach to pray after me, Our Father, which art in Washington. And then I'd get organized. I'd educate authors in how to make lurid literature exciting so that anything else would appear dull and uninteresting. I'd threaten TV with dirtier movies and vice versa. I'd peddle narcotics to whom I could. I'd sell alcohol to ladies and gentlemen of distinction. I'd tranquilize the rest with pills. If I were the devil, I'd soon have families at war with themselves, churches at war with themselves, and nations at war with themselves, until each in its turn was consumed. And with promises of higher ratings, I'd have mesmerizing media fanning the flames. If I were the devil, I would encourage schools to refine young intellects, but neglect to discipline emotions. Just let those run wild. Until before you knew it, you'd have to have drug-sniffing dogs and metal detectors at every schoolhouse door. Within a decade, I'd have prisons overflowing. I'd have judges promoting pornography. Soon I could evict God from the courthouse, then from the schoolhouse, and then from the houses of Congress. And in his own churches, I would substitute psychology for religion and deify science. I would lure priests and pastors into misusing boys and girls and church money. If I were the devil, I'd make the symbol of Easter an egg and the symbol of Christmas a bottle. If I were the devil, I'd take from those who have and give to those who wanted until I had killed the incentive of the ambitious. And what'll you bet? I couldn't get whole states to promote gambling as the way to get rich. I would caution against extremes in hard work, in patriotism, in moral conduct. I would convince the young that marriage is old-fashioned, that swinging is more fun, that what you see on TV is the way to be. And thus I could undress you in public, and I could lure you into bed with diseases for which there is no cure. In other words, if I were the devil, I'd just keep right on doing what he's doing.